Hello YouTubers, welcome to part 6 of the series. Here is what this video will cover today. So in this part, we'll dive into our bow part and try to make it work. So let's now see what our table of contents will have. So first one is polishing and setting up our bow animation trees, and then we'll try to create some bow states for our bow. Then we will make sure that our string properly behaves with our player hand during our draw arrow animation. And the prerequisites for this video are nothing much because everything is covered in all those previous videos. Alright, so now let's see the previous recap. So in the last video we worked with our fall state, fixed movement issues and set up multiple cameras using phantom camera. And if you did not watch the video, then please do it before going further to have some better understanding. So now let's create a new scene. So this will be a 3D scene of our bow. So let's rename the root node as bow and let's drag and drop the bow model, and the model was inside these models inside this bow folder. So let's just drag and drop here and let's see the animations of this. So let's right click and click on editable children, and in the animation player let's see, and okay, we see that the draw animation of bow is not correct. The lower part is not actually working, it's only the upper part. And let's see the overdraw, this is working fine. Let's go for the release, and yes, everything is working. And by the way, you can just press A to move the animation backward, D to move it forward, and S to stop it. And if you press S once again, then it goes to the starting. And the problem is with this draw, so only the upper part is working, the lower part is not working. So let's quickly fix it. So let's open up the Blender. So this was the file that we left previously in our Blender, and make sure that you save your Blender files. So if you don't save your Blender files, then you need to do everything from scratch. Anyways, I just saved my Blender file, so I didn't have any problem. So let's select the armature now and let's see what's the problem. So in the action editor, if we select the animation as draw, and here you can see that again the same issue, only the upper part is actually working, not the lower one. So let's quickly fix that. So make sure you go to the frame 1, then go to the pose mode, and this time let's grab this bone, and you can see that the inverse kinematics are properly working, but the problem is with the limit distance of this bone to this bone. So let's select this bone, go to our bone constraints, and let's add a limit distance. Select the target as the armature, select the bone as our string bone, and now the problem should be gone. Okay, and also now it's properly working. So in the pose mode, select all the bones by pressing A, and so let's press Ctrl space, and you'll see that the actions are properly baked now. So if you don't have the option to bake, then you can watch the first tutorial on how to bake the animations. Okay, anyways, now it's time to check our release animation, and yes, even this is working, and even the rest. Okay, so let's go to object mode again. Let's select the armature, shift select our mesh, make sure it's properly grabbed, and let's go to file, export, and let's export our model. Browse the folder where you have your project. So in my case it's in Archer series, and inside the models, inside the bow, let's select bow.glb. In the include section, make sure you click on the selected objects, and let's export it. So once the export has been completed, let's jump to Godot. And now let's try to play the draw animation, and yes, this is working fine. So now let's also select the root node and add animation tree as a child of it. And in the animation tree, let's select the animation player as the animation player of our bow. And in the tree root, let's add a blend tree. So once you select the blend tree, you'll have an option of animation tree at this bottom section. So here we will add a transition node that will basically transition between different states of our bow. So select the transition node. In the inputs, add the element as the rest or let it be idle, and the second element will be draw, basically name of our animation. The last one is release. So now we have three of the transitions, and we are not going to add the fourth transition, that's basically overdraw, even though we have created the animation over here. But we'll not be using this overdraw because again, setting up the whole thing for this is a lot of complications, and that would seriously drag this complete series a lot. So if you want to have the feature of overdraw and a lot other features of reaction, jump, crouch, and many more, please support me and make sure you buy the controller on itch.io. So now, before wasting further more time, let's come back to series and let's select the animation tree. Let's add 3 animation nodes, and the first animation will be rest, that's connected to idle. Then let's have draw, that's connected to this draw, and last we have release, that's connected to release. And now select the transition node. In the X fade time, set the value as 0.1. So this will be the fade in transitions between our animations. And again, if you want to know more about all the nodes of our animation tree, please make sure you watch my tutorial where I have explained all the nodes clearly so that you have much more idea. And now let's quickly see if it works. So let's try for idle, let's go for draw, and let's try to release. Yes, everything is working. And now it's time to add script for our root node. So let's attach a script, and inside the player, maybe let's create a folder, call it as additional scripts, and let's create a script inside that. So let's delete all the default stuff, and let's also save our scene. We'll save our scene inside the player, and let's create a additional scene folder and let's save it over there. So in the script at the beginning, let's create the state for our bow. Let's create enum bow states, and we'll basically have 3 states. So the first one will be draw, then we will have release, and the last one is idle. So these are the states similar to the animations that we had. And now we'll not actually keep track of the bow states on our bow, but these states will be responsible for changing our animation tree. So we'll be using the states to transition on our node. So now let's create a function to change our transition. So for that, let's call change bow state, and here we actually need to get the argument to which state we need to travel, and the type will be of our bow states. And here, okay, let's change, so change bow states. So now here we need to actually get some value of maybe the idle, draw, or release based on this. So here all these states are treated as caps, and Godot will not able to convert the state into strings. So actually we need to say Godot that, hey, if our bow state is draw, Then we need the string as draw so that we can change to that state. So for that, let's create again one more function, and this function we will name it as get bow state name. So here the argument will be our toState. So now let's create a match our toState. So if our toState matches to our draw, then we return the keyword as draw. So now based on our state, so if our current state is bow states is draw, then we can just return the string that's similar to this. And next, if our toState matches to release, then we can return this release string. If it doesn't match to any, then we can return idle. So the last one is idle, so that's why we just write a default case. So if none of the states match, then we just return idle. Okay, so now we can create the variable and call this function, and the state name will be the same, our toValue. So here we specify to which state we need to travel, and this will return the value for our transition node to which state we need to travel. And now we need to actually set these values. And in previously on our player controller, if you remember, then we just created a script to control our complete animation tree. But here, just creating a script to control a single node is, I don't think, worth. So let's just control this node from our root script rather than just creating a script for the animation tree to control a single node. Okay, you can do either way, but let's do it in our root script. So here, let's first create the reference for our animation tree at the beginning. So let's say on ready var animation tree, and let's create the reference for our node. Now we can call the animation tree set, and here we need to set our transition request. So parameters, and the node is transition, so similar to this. And then here transition request is basically setting up the value on here. So the value that we need to set is the state name that we return from here. So now we can actually change the state of this transition using this code, this line. Okay, so what next? Well, let's also disable our animation tree so that it doesn't function. And at the beginning we set our animation tree active to be true. So either if by mistake if we set it as inactive, then still at the time when our scene loads up, our animation tree will be active. Cool. Now let's quickly add our bow to our player. So to add the bow to our player, let's first create a node 3D, and all the attachable parts for our bow will be added under this node. So let's rename it to attachable, and let's add a bone attachment node and set the bone attachment, use external option, because the bone attachment node is meant to be under the skeleton, but this time the node is separated from the skeleton, so we use an external skeleton. And let's assign the skeleton 3D of our archer. So now in the bone name, you'll see that we have all the list of options of the bones that are in our skeleton 3D. So let's select the left hand for our bow placement, and even though we select the left hand, bone is at the origin point. So to fix that, what we can do is we can just change our animation tree to be active. So if it's inactive, or sometimes the character goes to T-pose, so at that time you can just make it as active to play the animation. And here let's change our player state to be active, and let's also trigger this aim one shot, so we can clearly see where our player is placing his hand. And this time when you select the bone attachment node, you will see that the bone attachment is moving with the animation. So this node really helps us to attach our bone to our player hand. Cool. So now let's add the child as our bow scene. So Control Shift A to add any of the scene, and we just select our bow, and you can see the bow is not properly placed. So now let's quickly place our bow properly on our player hand. So by pressing numpad 3, so make sure you don't have numlock on, and now whenever you press 1 3 or numpad 7, this view goes to top, front and right. So we'll use this 7 1 and 3 to properly place our bow. And also if you press alt 1, then it goes to rear view. So 1 is on front and alt 1 is on back. Similarly, numpad 3 is right view, and alt numpad 3 goes to left view. So let's properly place our bow. So make sure you select the bow, not bone attachment. Right, so once you have roughly placed your bow, so it may have some of the glitches on the hand, but you can just take your time to properly place it. Or sometimes your bow model will not suit up the hands of a player, so that's okay, because these are very small tiny details and no one is gonna have a look on that. Anyways, so now once you have properly placed the bow, so if we go to our inactive, then you will see that the bow is on the player hand. So we don't want that. We want our bow to be only visible whenever our player is in the active mode, and whenever the player goes to inactive, we need to turn off. So for that, let's write a function. So let's call the function as show or hide bow, and here we will set the visibility to be the opposite of its visibility. So whenever we call this function, if our bow is visible, then we just set the not so that it becomes invisible. And whenever we call this function when the bow is visible, so it returns the not value, so it becomes invisible. And we can also set our animation tree to be the same value as visible. So if our bow is visible, then the animation tree also gets active. If it's invisible, then the animation tree also becomes inactive. And just a note that visibility does not change the behavior of the script. So you may think like, hey, if the node is invisible, then the script is not gonna run, but that's not the case. So always make sure that the script run and the visibility are two different factors, and they both are not same. Sometimes the beginner developers always feel this issue. So whenever they try to add any gun on the scene, what they do is they basically make it invisible, and they try to fire the ammo, and the gun will always shoot the ammo even though it's invisible. So that's what the case some people do, but yes, I have just made a point clear so you don't feel the same. Okay, now let's make it invisible, so whenever our player goes to our inactive state, the bow becomes invisible, and whenever he changes from inactive to active, the bow is visible. And whenever the player enters the aim state, what we can do is we can basically call our change bow state, and we can change our state to draw whenever the player goes to aim, and whenever the player goes from aim to back to active, then we can just call the release, so that the bow plays our release animation. And for that, let's create one more function, call it as shoot, and whenever we call this function, we just change our bow mode. So now you may ask like, hey, why do we create a function for shoot and why not you create a function for draw? Well, that's completely optional. We can create a separate function to draw, but we actually require this function because in future when we try to add arrows and then whenever we try to release, at that time we also need some other scripts to run along with our release. So that's why we just combine all those block of code inside this single shoot function. So that's the reason we create a separate function for shoot but not for draw. Anyways, now let's try to call our change bow state function from our aim. So again, these are two different nodes, so we can't directly call a function of this node. So rather, let's create the reference of our bow inside our character body. So let's create onReady var bow manager, or let's name it as bow control, that equals to our bow node inside the bone attachment. Cool. Now let's go to aim, and whenever we try to enter it, we just call agent bow control, and here we need to call our change bow state. So we call the function, and the change bow state actually requires an argument of our bow state. So let's call our bow states. So from here dot draw, and whenever we exit our aim state, we can just roughly call our shoot function. So now let's try to play. Let's go to active, and okay, the bow is not visible. So let's go to active. Whenever we try to enter, we can call this show hide bow function from our active. So whenever we enter, of our bow control node, we just call this show or hide bow, and whenever we try to exit, we again call the same function, so it hides our bow. And actually, let's comment this line out. Now you can see that the string is somewhere else, it's not on our player's hand. Anyways, let's try to release, and the bow is not visible. So let's see what's happening. We change our bow state to release, and we call this function again in our active. So whenever we enter our active, we call this function again, so that's why the bow is getting hidden. So let's just again comment this code and try now. So we need to fix, the rotation of our player, because we can't, exactly see what's happening with our bow and its string, and the animation is playing properly. So let's quickly select our archer and slightly rotate it so that he's slightly facing in the right direction. So now we need to rotate our bow slightly. So let's see. Let's select the animation tree. Let's go to active. Let's turn on our one shot. Let's select our bow and let's rotate our node. Properly place it again. So just take your time to place our bow. Anyways, let's test it out one last time. And now you can see that the string is not properly aligning with the hand. So how do we fix that? Well, for that, if you select the bone attachment, here we have an option of override pose. So this will help us to deal with the issue that we just got, so that the string can be on our player's hand. So for that, in the attachable, let's add one more bone attachment node and let's rename it to right hand. So this will be the position of our string that we need to attach. So in the right hand node, let's again select our skeleton 3D, and the bone we will be targeting is the thumb hand index 1. So we'll be setting our string position to this bone. And now let's go to our bow scene, and here let's again add a node 3D. This, let's rename it as bow bones. Let's add a bone attachment 3D, and this will be our string bone that we need to modify. So select the string bone, and this time whenever we try to turn on this override pose, you can actually change the location of the string. So if you turn it off, it resets its location. Whenever you turn on, you can change the location of the string. So we'll be using this override pose option to set the position of our string to our player's right hand node. So let's also rename this bone to string. And now in the script, whenever we try to play our draw animation, at that time let's change the value of our string bone and turn on this override pose. So for that, let's create the reference in the beginning, and whenever we return this draw, we can set our override pose to be true. And whenever we release, we can just unset our override pose. So why do we actually unset our override pose? Well, that's because our bow animation has this release. So our bow has this release animation. So this animation is completely based on our string. So the string has this animation that looks cool. So if we don't turn off our override pose, then this cool animation will be lost. So that's the reason why we turn it off whenever we try to shoot. And also we need to create a variable so that when our player plays draw arrow animation, at that time only we need to set our string bone position to our player's right hand. So if our player is not shooting the arrows, at that time we don't want the string bone to be on our player's right hand. So for that we need to create a variable. Let's call it as hold string. So this will help us to do that. And also in the process function, if our hold string is true, at that time we need to set our string bone position to our player's right hand. So again, to do that, to have the reference of the right hand, for that first we need to have the reference of our player, then only we can target the right hand. So we need to have the reference of the player from this node. So to do that, let's export a variable, call it as player. The type will be character body 3D. So now whenever you select the node, you can see that we have an option to assign the player. So we'll assign the root node. So this is how we can quickly get the reference of the player using an export var. You can also use already var, and then you can specify doing something like this, getting the parent and again getting the parent. But this is one more way how to quickly set up the reference of a node. Cool. Now whenever our hold string is active, that means we need to set the string position to our player's hand. So we just call the player dot find child. So this function helps us to get any of the node name that we specify here. The name of the node is right hand. So this will return the reference of this node. So in this video we learned three types of reference. So the first one is something like this, that's hard coded. Then we have an export variable that's easy and quickly to assign. And at last we just use the find child function that's only helpful to find a children inside any of the scene. So here our player always have the node called right hand, so we know that, so that's why we use a method, and this method will return the reference of our right hand. So let's call it as right hand with a variable. And now we need to get the position of the right hand, so let's call a right position that equals to right hand dot global transform dot origin. And now we can set our string bone position. So we can just call string dot global position dot origin is equal to our right position, so right hand position. And why do we use our global transform? And that's because here the bow string and the right hand are two different points inside the complete scene tree, and in future this scene tree may again get instantiated on our world or any different scene. At that time it becomes difficult to access the position of our right hand, so we use our global coordinates to set its value. So this will help us, no matter where our right hand position is inside the scene tree, it will always set our string to the position of our right hand. Cool. And let's also clean this mess up by creating a function. Call the function as update bow string pose. And now let's paste these 3 lines of code, and we can call this function here. So now we need to turn on this hold string value. So for that we need to again create a function, call it as set hold string with a value of type boolean, and our hold string will be equal to our value. So whenever we say that, hey, set the hold string to be true, then we set our string position to our player's right hand, and whenever we call this function and say hey, set it false, which means we no longer set our position of our string bone to player, so this will not run. Okay, so now we need to call this function from our aim. So whenever we enter this state, along with the draw animation trigger, we call the set hold string of our bow controller, and here we say like, hey, we need to set the string bone, and whenever we say exit, we set the value to be false. So let's check it out. And you can see this is working. Cool. Let's try to release, and no, now we get one more error. And how do we fix that? Well, I think we can change this position here. So whenever we play the release, then we can set it as false. Let's check it out now. And yes, whenever we try to change our state, again we have sort of glitch. So now where do we actually place this? And I think we can cleverly place it at here. So we can just call this function inside our shoot. So that's why I said that we need to create a separate function for shoot, that can have a block of code, while for triggering the draw state, we can directly call this function, and no need to have a separate function for that. Anyways, let's check it out now. And you can see it's working, even though the setting up the string is not properly working. The string gets to the player hand whenever we try to enter the aim, and that we don't want. And whenever we try to release, the bow string doesn't go immediately to its original state, and there is some latency. So we'll fix that. So now, how do we actually set the hold string appropriate with the animation of our player? Well, for that, let's first see where all we are using our set hold string functions. So I think in the aim we set it here, and the next one was here. That's okay. So now we need to properly set our hold string whenever the player properly plays the shoot animation. So for that, you can select the AnimationPlayer, or I think we need to select the model of our archer. So let's double click this, and now let's select the standing aim recoil. So, or let's select maybe the draw arrow. Yes, this one. So we need to trigger the point at here. So for that, first we need to make sure that we can change any of the properties on this animation. So for that, we need to turn on this save to file option, and we need to set a path for that. So in the player, or let's say in the model, in the archer, let's create a new folder, call it as animation data, and here we can save. So we also need to specify the name of it. So let's say draw arrow, and save it, and make sure this keep custom track is turned on, else you may lose progress whenever you delete the .godot file. Anyways, we also need to turn on the save to file on our recoil animation. So let's quickly do that. Save, make sure this keep custom track is turned on. So once both of these changes are finished, you can just click on re-import, and now whenever you select the animation player, you can select the animation that we just changed. So draw arrow, and here we can actually add any of the custom tracks that we need. So let's first disable the animation tree. Let's select the animation player, change the animation to draw arrow, and here we need to add a call method track, and we need to call a function of our bow. So let's add a call method track, select the bow, and nope, we don't see anything changed. No issues. Let's just change the scene, and now let's try it one more. And now you can see that we have two different functions. So let's just delete one. And now at this point, at this frame interval, so you can just press Control and middle mouse scroll up to zoom in the timeline. So at this point we want the string to be on the player's hand, so we don't want to set it here. So whenever our player is at this point, we need to set our string bow on the player hand. So for that we need to call the function of our bow. So let's also enable this option so that on the proper frame we call a function of our bow. So just right click at this point, insert, and we can call this set hold string function. So just click on open to create a keyframe and select the keyframe. In the arguments we need to turn on this. So here you can see whenever we call this set hold, we pass an argument, and this time we need to pass the argument to be true so that the hold string value gets true. So for that, this is how we do. We just create a keyframe and select the keyframe. In the arguments, the type of boolean, we just set its value to be true, and in the recoil, in the standing aim recoil, let's add the same stuff. So let's call a method track of our bow, and no, okay, so now we just added, I think there is a glitch on this Godot version, but changing the scenes will actually make it work. And at this point, let's again insert, let's call the same set hold string, and we don't need to call this same function, we can just call the shoot. So we just added our set hold string inside the shoot, so we can just call this function, and there is no argument for that. And also in the aim, we'll just delete this line from the exit. So this time both the shoot and the set string is called from our animation tree rather than calling it from our states, and I think now this should work fine. And no, it's not working. Why is that? Well, in this again Godot updated version, we need to also manually turn on those options inside our animation tree. In the active, in this one shot, we need to turn on these functions. So that's why the set hold string didn't work. So now I think it should work fine, and you can see yes. So let's release, and yes, it's working. So now we get the release arrow problem. So the draw is working fine on the string, but let's say we release the arrow, and you see that there is a slight bulge on the string, and the bulge is due to the animation that we have. So for an example that, let's go to release, and we turn off the override pose, and then it goes to its original pose, that will be basically this, and then it tries to play this animation, and that's the reason why we get a slight bulge after we release. So let's fix that. For that, what we can do is, like, we can remove these both stuff from the shoot, or let's say we just change this one. So function, let's call a release state, and in that we can just set our change bow state to be release. And previously I said that we can create the function, and then we can call multiple block of code, and yes, that we can do, but there was a slight problem with the animation that we created. So for that, the duration of the animation is quite long, and again opening the blender and doing all those fancy stuff, I feel like that's hectic. So let's try to fix it in code itself. So now let's call this release state function inside our aim. So whenever we release our left click or right click, we call our this state from our bow controller. So let me just tell you how we solved it. So the issue is with the animation, and along with this hold string. So the hold string first sets up, and then the animation starts to play, and that's the reason the string goes to its original position, and then the release is played. So to fix that, what we basically do is, we call our animation release, and in between, as soon as the player releases the string, the function of this is called inside our animation player. And when the animation player calls this function, we just set our string default position, and next the animation will continue. So let's quickly see, and you can see it's properly playing. Okay, so now what we need to do is, we need to turn on our bow visibility. So the function that we created, show or hide bow, so we need to show or hide our bow when our player is inactive. So again, to do that, in the animation player, in the equip bow animation here, whenever our player is at this keyframe, we need to show our bow, and whenever he goes back to this keyframe, we need to hide our bow. So again, we can't add any method in this track, and that's because we did not set this custom timeline. So I mean that whenever we double click our glb file, we need to again do the same thing that we did previously. So we need to add the custom track for our equip bow. So this save to file, click on enable, save the path in the model archer animation data, and let's call it as equip bow, save, and click on this keep custom track, and let's re-import. Okay, so now let's change our animation to equip bow, and you can see that we get an option to add track, and let's add a call method track on our bow, and let's scroll down. Okay, we don't see that keyframe, so let's save the scene, just change the scene once again, and now we see this option. All right, let's zoom in. Let's also make sure we enable this snapping, and at this point let's add a keyframe, and the name of the function is show hide bow. So let's click on open, and we have added the keyframe. Cool. Let's hide our bow. So let's hide it from our scene. So it will be even hidden in our instantiated scene. So let's check it out now. And it's hidden, it's visible, hidden, visible, hidden, visible. Cool. Now it's time to add the arrow for the bow, and also we need to add the shooting mechanism for the arrow. So let's do that. Now it's time to see all the scripts that we have made. So in this part, let's see what progress we made. So the first one was polished and fixed bow animations. Then we built up an animation tree state for our bow, scripted our bow states, and tried to sync our string movement with our player hand, and also used AnimationPlayer to have some precision. Before we wrap up, if you enjoyed this video, then don't forget to hit like, drop a comment, and also subscribe for more future content. And if you'd like to go with an extra mile in supporting me, then you can just grab the potato card membership on my itch.io for just 1 USD. Every bit of this support really helps me for keep me creating more stuff and improving for you guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.